Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, welcome to this event of the Martin Center on Ukrainian refugees and temporary protection in the European Union. Welcome whether you are with us physically in the room or whether you are watching us on the Martin Center YouTube channel directly or through Facebook, Twitter, or the Martin Center webpage. My name is Vít Novotný and I will be your moderator. The Russian aggression against Ukraine has caused the most intensive refugee flight that Europe has ever experienced when measured by the number of people crossing international boundaries in a short period of time. In the first 60 days of the invasion, the UNHCR recorded 5,212,000 border crossings from Ukraine, the vast majority in the westward direction of the European Union and Moldova. The EU response to the inflow of the Ukrainian refugees has been uncharacteristically decisive. Within 8 days, the interior ministers unanimously triggered the temporary protection directive that grants an immediate and collective protection to all Ukrainians who were present in Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. Since then, Ukrainians have been registering themselves in the different member states and almost immediately receiving accommodation, benefits, the right to work, and education for children and young people. Our event today focuses on how the temporary protection instrument is working almost 4 months into its activation. We have an excellent panel gathered here today. Esther Pothovera is the head of the Asylum Unit at the Directorate General for Migration and Home Affairs at the European Commission. Adam Kittel is Deputy Coordinator and Justice and Home Affairs Counselor at the Permanent Representation of Czechia to the EU. And Eva Psiurska is First Secretary at the Justice and Home Affairs section of the Permanent Representation of Poland. Our seminar will last 90 minutes. After brief presentations from the panelists and a discussion between them inside the panel, we'll take questions from you in the room and from you who are watching us online. If you are in the room, just raise your hand, whether you have a question or comment. If you are following us online, you can ask your question through Facebook or Twitter. I would like now to ask each panelist to evaluate how temporary protection is working from their perspective. We'll start with Eva Psiurska. Eva, Poland has almost 1,200,000 people registered for temporary protection, the largest number in the European Union. How would you evaluate the instrument of temporary protection so far?
Okay, thank you, Vít, for giving me the floor and inviting me today as the representative of Poland. It is very valuable to be able to present our experiences related to providing support to the refugees from the Ukraine. I wanted to start from some information, some facts. As you mentioned, we've been witnessing the biggest forced migration influx in Europe since the Second World War. And due to unprovoked aggression of Russia against Ukraine, Poland and other neighboring countries had to immediately start providing the support to the unprecedented numbers of people fleeing the war. We all remember the tense before the war began. Polish authorities were aware of the risk of the massive influx, so some preparation has been made, or had been made before the war began. However, what I would like to underline is that the scale of the inflow was much higher than anyone could predict. So before the 24th of February, Poland made some preparations. On the 18th of February, the Interministerial Committee on Reception of People Coming from Ukraine to Poland, and in parallel, a similar committee on reception of victims of violence or wounded people who require medical support were created. And the works on preparation, on drafting the special act started. There was also the plan on providing first reception prepared. So on this basis, the support, the first reception was activated immediately on the 24th of February. As Vít mentioned, more than 2 million people were registered as the beneficiaries of temporary protection, but we have also to take into account the numbers of people entering neighboring countries. So since the 24th of February, around 4.4 million people entered Poland from Ukraine. Including more than 3.1 million Ukrainians. And what has to be underlined, most of them were women and children. As I said, these data are entries, but we are also collecting more detailed data, asking people entering Poland about the reason. So more than 2.3 million people entering declared that they are fleeing Ukraine due to the armed conflict. We also monitor the numbers of people returning back to the Ukraine. In general, we cannot say exactly how many people are present in Poland right now, but it is very, very high number in comparison, for example, with the crisis in 2015, 2016 in the south of Europe. And so what I would like to underline is that people living Ukraine were entering Poland via the border crossing points. There were no attempts to do it illegally. And some of these people were in possession of the biometric passports, what allowed them to enter the EU for up to 19 days and travel within the EU. Some of these people had some valid travel documents, so old passports and visas allowing them to enter Poland, but some did not have any documents, let's say, in order to meet fully the criteria of entry. But the Schengen Borders Code foresees such situations, so due to the humanitarian reasons, in Poland they were issued consents of the Commander-in-Chief of the Polish Border Guard. It's on the basis of national legislation, but it is related to the Schengen Borders Code. And these people had a right to enter Poland on the basis of the documents which they possessed. So, for example, in case of children, it could be even the school certificates. So the war started in the middle of the winter, and it was very important to make the time needed to enter the Poland as short as possible, because waiting in the queues was a danger for health and even life of people, of war refugees. So Poland made all of the efforts to make the border traffic smooth and allow people fleeing the war to enter our territory. All border crossing points were open to the pedestrian traffic, and requirement of the quarantine was lifted because it was still during the pandemic. So in the peak, the numbers of entries reached 140,000 entries per day. It was enormous. First, reception and accommodation have been provided and coordinated by the regional authorities in the close cooperation with local communities, NGOs, international organizations, and citizens, of course, as well. At the moment, there are 30 reception points that handled over 1,080,000 evacuees, and there is around 120 information points all over Poland. Some refugees benefited from the, let's say, state-led accommodation centers. It was a relatively low number because it was less than 400,000 people throughout Poland. And there are more than 5,000 such places operating right now. These numbers, when it comes to the accommodation, were relatively low because many of people fleeing the war, especially in the beginning of the conflict, had someone in Poland or in EU who could support them, so family members or friends, but not everyone. And as I said, there was enormous support of the citizens. So in Poland, ordinary people decided to host refugees. So it was impressive, significant support. And some of the refugees decided to move onward, I mean to other EU member states. So I will now try to go to the TPD. So as Vít mentioned, it was decided to trigger the TPD was decided very fast and jointly by all the ministers. The purpose of the TPD is to avoid the unnecessary administrative burden and better use of the resources. So the asylum system is parallel. In case of the refugees fleeing the war, it is obvious that they need protection, so the examination of their cases, their applications is not needed. They receive temporarily, it is, I think, important that it is for just a period of time, rights similar to the rights of the recognized refugees and people granted subsidiary protection. Another thing what is worth mentioning is that in normal standard examination of the asylum application, it is important to assess whether the state is a persecution actor or is able to provide protection internally or not. In the cases of the Ukrainian refugees, there is a strong cooperation with the Ukrainian authorities. So they are supporting the beneficiaries of temporary protection present in the EU. And when it comes to the decision of the ministers, they decided not to apply the Article 11 of the Temporary Protection Directive. So there is no take-back rule. It is important to underline that there was 1 week of spontaneous movements within the EU of people fleeing the war. So it would be difficult to imagine the take-back mechanism in such situation. And TPD is very old act because it's from 2001. So it does not reflect the current acquis, current reality, current challenges.
If that's okay, I would stop you there. I will continue after the other presentations. Before we do so, not everybody in the room probably is familiar with the term take back. Would you explain what it means?
Okay, so in asylum under the Dublin regulation, there is a rule that one member state is responsible for asylum application, and there are some scenarios, situations when it applies. So the country, the member states of first entry could be responsible for the asylum seeker. Take back procedure is to, let's say, decide that this member state is responsible. It's between member states, and then organize transfer. So it's like additional burden in such situation.
Mm-hmm. So in case, in this particular situation, for example, if the people entered Poland as the first country, under asylum rules, Poland would be responsible in general for the processing of these people. So let's say if an Ukrainian moved onwards to Germany, Poland would then be required to request that person to return to Poland and to be processed. That is not the case for the temporary protection directive. That was decided that this rule does not apply, which allows, if I can interpret what you said, which allows Ukrainians basically free movement across the European Union. Right. Thank you. Adam, now onwards to you. Czechia has the highest number of Ukrainian refugees per capita population. What is the Czech experience with temporary protection?
Yeah. Well, good afternoon all, and thank you, Vít, for inviting me to this event and to discuss this very interesting topic. As you know, we are not a country bordering Ukraine directly, but still we are one of the main destination countries for Ukrainian refugees. That is because we have a very large Ukrainian diaspora historically. So many of the refugees fleeing Ukraine would naturally go to the Czech Republic, where they have some family or other social or cultural links. I could actually repeat many of what was said by Eva. Of course, I think one particular issue is very special about this refugee crisis, and that is that we all faced very similar challenges, especially at the start of the war. Like Poland, we of course had some contingency planning, but our contingency planning was indeed in complete different levels. So I think it was within a week when we reached the very black scenario of our contingency planning we had for a crisis like this. The volume and the speed of the refugees coming was really unprecedented. Since then, and that lasts for until now, and it will last for some time, we have completely exhausted our capacities, and the inflow of people put an enormous pressure, especially when it comes to the accommodation, but also healthcare and education. As I've also mentioned, most of the refugees coming are women and small children, and that brings an additional pressure on the capacities. And indeed, it will be a huge challenge for some sectors, as is education, employment, or healthcare. 4 months later, at the moment, the number of Ukrainian refugees in the Czech Republic corresponds to roughly 4% of our population. And if you would add another 2.5–3% of our population being Ukrainians before the war, we are close to 6 to 7% of our population being Ukrainians, which you can imagine is rather massive. I was in Prague a few weeks back, and when you get into a public transport, you hear Ukrainian everywhere. And it is a very strange feeling, not in a negative way, but something we obviously are not used to. As we'd also mentioned, at the moment we have issued over 380,000 of temporary protection statuses, and that is the highest number per capita in the EU. I would maybe mention very quickly a few elements of our response, which I think were quite key, and I think it will quite well add to what Eva said previously. I think that triggering of the temporary protection directive was indeed a right move, and it allowed the member states to react in a coordinated way, and in a way it indeed decreased the burden on the most affected member states, being it Poland or Czech Republic, because those people could freely move to other countries and seek protection there as well. It also provided a certain level of flexibility in terms of how we cope with the arrival of the people, how we cope with the registration, while maintaining the same status of protection and the same level of rights that we are providing to those people. As I mentioned already, close cooperation and coordination, both on national and EU level, is extremely important in these cases. And even more maybe on the national level, because you can imagine that, for example, in the case of Czech Republic, many of the refugees would be kind of naturally going specifically to the 2 or 3 big cities, Prague being the top destination of arrivals, which again put an increased demand and burden on the capital, while other regions were perhaps less affected, and we had to deal with that, and that's not always an easy task. What we thought was a very important element is the information provision, and you have to do it very quickly, because the people not having the information, of course, then try to find the information elsewhere, and that can lead to abuse in some cases, but also to situations that are less controllable, let's say. So we have established a helpline and email address, and of course a specific webpage in Ukrainian, in Czech language, Russian, and English, where official information were distributed immediately, including the capacities of different regions in the country. So the people could also see that perhaps they would be processed faster in some places rather than in other. Of course, one huge issue, as always, is funding. So having some funding resources available very quickly is key, and that again applies both for the national level as well for the EU level, and we have done quite a lot of work on that. And when I mentioned at the beginning that we have exhausted, or that we have reached the black scenario of our contingency planning in the first few days, it doesn't mean that we need to stop there. So we actually had to redeveloping and rewriting the contingency planning parallel to dealing with the situation, to be prepared that the situation could get actually much worse. We have that contingency plan adopted now, and it basically works with another 3 scenarios of additional 300,000, 600,000, and 1 million refugees arriving. We hope this will never happen, but of course it's rather unpredictable when it comes to the future developments in Ukraine. Then, of course, as well, a forward planning exercise is something you need to launch as soon as possible. We have already in April approved a strategic document outlining medium and long-term priorities that would address this challenge. It is encompassing 13 key policy areas, and of course it touches areas like, again, education, healthcare, housing, employment, social support, and so on. Because you can imagine in September when all those kids will apply for schooling, we will actually have we'll have to double the capacity of a normal school year, which is something extremely difficult, both when it comes to the physical realities of our educational system, but also when it comes to financing. And very last point, and that is the role of the civil society. I think it is incredibly important and incredibly, positive that civil society reacted in the way they reacted, and I think we have to be forever thankful for this. And I think it's important that we recognize this very clearly as well from let's say the government side, and then we provide a further empowerment to the civil society to continue providing the support we so need. And just one number to underline how important this is. Still, at the moment, 85% of the refugees in the Czech Republic are accommodated in subsidized private accommodations, and only 15% are in state-run accommodation facilities. And without that, I think we would not be able at all to manage the situation. And I will stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Esther, how do things look from the viewpoint of the European Commission? The temporary protection triggering as unprecedented. What's the EU-wide picture?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me and to this very interesting panel and with different perspectives. What I would say first is to go back a bit in time when we were adopting the temporary protection, when we decided to activate it, and just to say that this was really something was last minute. As Poland and Czech Republic, the Commission also has different contingency planning, different scenarios with different possibilities. And on the 24th of February, for the anecdote, we were supposed to sit down with the French presidency to discuss the Solidarity Declaration that has been just adopted on the 22nd of June. And we were supposed to present to them what we thought it could be a way forward. And of course, that meeting was cancelled because it was the 24th of February 2022. And we started seeing 300,000 people arriving every day, and we told the commissioner, listen, this is scenario 3. We can forget all about the rest. The only solution we have is temporary protection. And we went to the weekend not knowing if actually we were going to activate temporary protection or not, because the Commission obviously was also talking together with the French presidency to different countries. And on Sunday evening, after this JJ Council, the extraordinary JJ Council, the decision was taken, we received a phone call, and we had to start immediately to draft a legislation on a Sunday evening for adoption on Wednesday morning at 8, which is extraordinary if you know the way the Commission works. And the inside works just with all the bureaucracy that we have inside. And just a word to the translators. They spent all night translating this text so that the ambassadors the next day could have everything ready for adoption during the JJ Council meeting of the 3rd of March. So just to give you a bit of how unprecedented this whole situation was. And indeed, what I would say on the wider EU perspective, what we learned maybe from the activation is how flexible the TPD is. It's an instrument, as it was said, from 2001. It was a different period in European history, I would say, and in the European Union construction. But what is very interesting is that it is text that is extremely fluid. And it's based very much on a principle which is the balance of efforts among member states. And this balance of efforts among member states is based on this idea that basically, yes, people have to stay in one place, but there will be a distribution afterwards among the member states. And this will be discussed with the member state. They will share what is their reception capacity. And then if one of the member states is feeling under extreme pressure, they could come to the other colleagues, to the other member states and say, I need help. And it's very fluid. There is no, it's just the principles as such. And the other element as well that is very important is that the directive was focusing on the rights. These are the rights, these are the standards, this is what everybody has to have. And another principle which was very important in directive, and is that we have to reduce administrative burden to the minimum. And these elements, this balance of efforts, this idea of reducing administrative burden to the minimum, and also the rights, give us a lot of flexibility on how to interpret the Temporary Protection Directive, because we are really focusing on what is the objective. It's really a directive, as it was done in the 1990s. It's a directive about the objectives and how we have to interpret this directive with that in mind. Obviously, the fact that member states decided to waive Article 11, that has been mentioned before, it also is a consequence of the philosophy, but also the type of population we had. It was mentioned we had mostly Ukrainian nationals with biometric passports, which can enter into European Union freely. So it was a way of saying, okay, they can ensure by themselves this balance of efforts, because in a way the people can, with their biometric passport, go and travel to EU, different member states. But also, so this is a bit what we thought was very positive, but we didn't have any experience. We have never activated this Temporary Protection Directive, and we never thought we would have to do it, to the point that we were supposed to repeal it. If you look at the pact, is in the crisis proposal, we propose to repeal. We take some of the elements of the TPD, but it's going to be repealed. But then it meant that we had to put into place, like Poland and Czech Republic, elements that are crucial to ensure this coordination among ourselves. And this spirit as well, that even if the people in principle can move, they can still, one or two member states can still be under a lot of pressure. And we have seen it with Poland and the Czech Republic. So we created the solidarity platform. And as Commission. And in this solidarity platform, the idea was to say, let's bring all the member states together, but also the EU agencies. Let's bring the operational and the legal and the funding. Let's bring all together and see how we can together implement this. And this is an element that it was also very much clear during the Council meeting. This is a European challenge, and we have to face this challenge together. It was a decision taken by unanimity, and the solidarity platform takes this into account. And in the solidarity platform also, we discovered the need, for example, if one member state says, like one of the ideas of the Czech Republic, we have to have these information hubs where people are going to know, listen, Czech Republic is really under a lot of stretch, so maybe you should choose another country to go to. Of course, the challenge here is that the people want to stay close to Ukraine, because their husbands are still in Ukraine, and it's much easier to go and visit your husband if you are very close to the border than you're in Spain or in Belgium or in the Netherlands. But this solidarity platform also creates this spirit of unanimity and the spirit of all together trying to find solutions to the problems that we all face together. Another element that we have is like, yes, people are moving, and the member states have an obligation to register people, but do we know where they are? What about people that may use this freedom to abuse the system and enjoy rights in Slovakia and the Czech Republic, which have also generous systems? So we had to put in place this registration platform. And we didn't have much, but in a month, basically, in 6 weeks, together with the member states, because this was, again, a joint effort, we put together this registration platform. And now we are sharing information of where the people are. And hopefully, by the end of the summer, we will have a better picture about where people are and what is the profile of the people we have. But this also means that we have to reflect, in the context of the pact, the lessons we have to learn from the Ukrainian crisis and from the activation of the TPD. For me, it is too early. And also, we cannot mix up a situation which is a crisis with structural migration problems, which is what the core of the pact is about. And also we have to take into account that now people are still very much welcoming, but we will have to fight the fatigue. And I remind you all in 2015, these people welcoming in the train stations in Germany, the Syrian refugees and the Iraqi refugees, what happened 6 months along the road. So we are now already encountering some fatigue. People are going on holidays. As Adam said, lots of people rely very much on private housing. Here in Belgium, the other day in the news, in the Belgian newspaper, people are going on holidays and they don't want the Ukrainian refugees to stay in their homes. So we will have to see how these evolve also in terms of the fatigue. So there will be lots of lessons to be learned. I can already tell you one of the things that the Spaniards and the Italians said during the meeting. I take note that secondary movements is not a problem anymore, and we take note that border procedures are not an issue anymore. So, and this was very clear also, you can see that everybody's taking notes about what the Temporary Protection Directive activation means. And we will all have to assess really what can we learn from it, and if there is something that we can take into account in the negotiations of the pact. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. That was interesting, Esther. Right now, I'd like to ask if there's anything you wanted to say, but you didn't have the moment to. So if you want to add an addition to what you said in your initial remarks, please feel free to do so. Also, if you have a response or question to another member of the panel, any of you?
Okay.
Eva, please.
So I will start. I wanted to say something about this flexibility, and indeed. We thought before the 24th of February that the Temporary Protection Directive will not be triggered. And all member states had to foresee the procedures for the TP in their national legislation, but it was it had to be written, but we thought that it will not be triggered. And after the decision of the activation of the TPD was made, we had to reflect how to implement it, in fact. In Poland, there was decision for two paths, I could say, because the decision foresees quite wide scope of the people who are entitled to the temporary protection. One of the group, which is the most of the people coming, are the Ukrainian citizens. So there was a special act on the assistance to Ukrainian citizens in connection with armed conflict in the territory of that country prepared and entered into force, which foresees procedures for the Ukrainian citizens and their spouses, and is organized using the structure of the regional and local authorities. In case of other categories of the beneficiaries of the temporary protection, the, let's say, old path is used, which was foreseen before the activation of the TPD, and as a transposition of the directive many years ago. And so other categories are registering themselves in the Office for Foreigners, which is responsible also for asylum and reception of asylum seekers in Poland. You can imagine the registration of more than 2 million people. And this solution, these two paths allowed to do it quite smoothly, because the local communities were responsible to do so. And otherwise, it would be a huge burden for our system. Okay, so what I wanted to say is, okay, sorry, I will check my notes. This act was the solution, but it had to be amended multiple times. There is a wide agreement on doing so, because all the political parties understand the issue. For example, Esther told about this registration platform. Poland has not sent its data yet, because we needed the legal basis for exchange of the information, because we deal with personal data. So data protection is very important. When it comes to the solidarity platform, I think it's a proof of the lessons learned, because after the crisis in 2015, 2016, after the COVID pandemic, we learned how to exchange information very fast and efficient. This decision to trigger TPD foresees use of the so-called blueprint network. I think Esther could say more about it, but using also VTCs, we are able to inform each other about the situation, monitor it, and also exchange the information on the preparedness and challenges, problems, issues to be solved. When it comes, so this is one thing. Another thing is that the crisis in 2015-16 was a reason to activate the so-called IPCR in the Council. It's integrated political crisis response mechanism. And also it allowed, it was used also during COVID pandemic in order to deal with this crisis. And it was activated because of the war as well. And this is the forum in which member states can discuss, and it is chaired by the presidency, of course. And so let's say this horizontal strategic level is discussed there. And Solidarity Platform is more operational, and I think it's similar to the way of dealing with the crisis caused by the COVID pandemic in the beginning, because it was like we didn't know how to do it, and Commission organized video conferences in order to discuss different things raising because of closing the internal borders and so on. So, and this solidarity platform is for us very valuable, and we think it's this set of mechanisms, of tools is a very good solution to deal with this unprecedented situation.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll stop you there. Adam or Esther, anything to add or ask another member of the panel?
Maybe very quickly on the Solidarity Platform, I think everything what was said by Esther and Eva is absolutely true. I would add one element which is maybe more horizontal, and I think that's the trust building that happens on that platform. You know, the positions of the council when it comes to the reform of the migration and asylum system can be sometimes quite dividing, and it has been so for quite a long time. And now having a solidarity platform where we all meet and we exchange information, we exchange best practices, because very frankly at the beginning it was very much learning by doing. As Esther said, it was the first time we were actually implementing the temporary protection directive. So I think the trust building element there and the sincere cooperation between the member states, but also between the member states and the Commission, I think is important side effect, so to say, to the solidarity platform. And then just very shortly, maybe on the possible impact on the reform, I think it's important to acknowledge that TPD itself was designed for a very specific types of crisis situations for the war, or as a consequence of the war in Yugoslavia. And of course, the war in Ukraine is in a way very similar situation, but that also means that it might be very difficult to replicate it or to use it to other types of crisis, or to as a tool to react to the permanent migratory flows that are connected, for example, to the search and rescue in the Mediterranean, or as a reaction to conflicts or wars that are happening in regions further upstream from the EU. And we have to see whether there are some elements that could be actually used also in these contexts. And I hope we would manage to gain something out of it. But we have to really keep in mind that in a way, and I hope that these kind of crises, as Ukraine war or the war in Yugoslavia, are rather exceptional, also because of the geography of the EU. And then, of course, it's a question whether they would be usable in those other situations I mentioned. And I think I can stop there. There is one issue I thought could be interesting to discuss as well, and that's the adaptation, integration, returns, and how we deal with that.
Well, we'll get to it in a second. If I will have one more word from Esther, and then I will open the floor. Okay, Esther, please.
Yes, I just wanted to very briefly, actually, on building on what Adam has said, and the Solidarity Platform is one of the big differences compared to the crisis in 2015 and 2016. For you don't know, but we were having these kind of meetings, but in Greece and in Italy. There was not something coordinated at EU level where we all sit down and try to share, I have a problem, how we can solve these issues. And as Adam said, I think it makes a big difference when we are all together discussing everything, not the situation in the Czech Republic, the situation in Poland, but the situation in the entire Union and the challenges that everybody is facing, because the challenges are different. And I couldn't agree more with Adam, this trust-building element of the platform, which is different from what happened in 2015 and 2016. And another point I wanted to mention is indeed, as Eva said, the COVID experience. I think one of the assets of the European Union is that we always learn from the crisis we had. And we always get better, I think. And COVID, with all these platforms that we organized precisely to coordinate with health ministers and the interior ministers, because they were both together, were very important. And also the use of new tools, the VTCs, is not anymore the JJ councillors sitting in a room, but it also allows everybody to bring people from the capital, the people that are actually facing those challenges, into the room. And I think it's very important. And the third point I wanted to say is that what always amazes me with our legislation, and now building on this issue of the crisis, and maybe we can discuss later, is how we always learn from the past crisis and we draft legislation based on the past experience, but not on the ones we cannot imagine. Because the crisis of tomorrow are not going to be the crisis of the past. They might be, but we might have others that we cannot even imagine. And this is the one we also have to reflect. And this, I take my mea culpa as civil servant of the Commission, that we sometimes have to take a step back and think the unthinkable and imagine the unimaginable. Because this is the challenges we will have in the 21st century, unfortunately, with food crisis, climate change, and demographic differences in Africa, and GDP development in Africa and Europe. And as Adam said, the geographical position of Europe is not going to change. It won't change. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take questions from the audience, and if you are following us online, please post your questions or comments through our social media. You can do so now or in the 45 minutes. Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Wait for the mic.
Thank you very, very much. My name is Thorsten Moritz. I work for the Churches Commission for Migrants in Europe, umbrella of Protestant, Anglican, Orthodox churches, very much involved on the ground in lots of these refugee hosting and other things. And we have ourselves here on Brussels level been discussing in 2000 the inception of the TPD, and then 2015 argued for it, and are very happy now about that it's happening. I have a number of questions to all three of you. I would still want to insist a bit on that. Are we rediscussing the famous responsibility against solidarity thing in a new light, maybe also simply because the countries needing more solidarity and having responsibility have changed geographically. So we simply having very new actors and very new roles in that. Eva, I wanted to ask you about two things. We have become aware that there may be some issue with the documentation of the title, that a lot of people say we don't have anything really in writing, which is no problem for that, I understand, as long as you're in Poland. But if you want to travel to see relatives or others becomes one, is that widespread? I simply want to know more. And I have to ask the question, do you think the movement on the Polish-Ukrainian border could de-block some of the situation at the Belarusian border, where we still have some people in dire situation? Adam, thanks for, I'll ask you about presidency. We wanted to meet, you were a bit too busy at that time. Do you think you can, together with the French approach and the Solidarity Declaration, get a new boost into the discussion there under your presidency? And Esther, I had a question. One of the things we hear different stories about is the interlinkages between TPD and the right to apply for asylum. For most people, TPD will be perfectly fine, we know, but for a specific group, asylum is still the way to go. And we hear from a number of countries that this is de facto not working, that administrations say you do TPD or you don't do anything at all at the moment, or we're not considering your case. Are you monitoring that?
Thank you. Quite a lot of specific questions. We'll wait before taking more questions from the audience or online, and we'll focus on the set of questions that you posed. Who wants to go first?
I can start again.
Oh, please.
Okay, so the first question was about the responsibility and solidarity. Poland underlined that is responsible for the protection of the border, and the solidarity should be flexible and adjusted to the needs and possibilities of the the needs of the member states which are on the first line, and possibilities of the supporting member states. Also, what we underlined many times is that the crisis, the protection, support should be provided in the proximity of the place where the problems occur. So in case of Ukraine, Poland and Slovakia and Hungary, Romania, Moldova are the neighboring countries. These people are fleeing the war, entering the first safe countries. Our obligation is to provide them support. And because we are in the Schengen, in the EU, the rules which are in force in this area are applied to these people. So this is what should be underlined. And when it comes to the other issues, Poland thinks that we should not focus on the relocation, because you cannot force people to move somewhere when they do not intend to do so. They want to go somewhere else, or they want to stay. In case of beneficiaries of the temporary protection, it was already mentioned by Adam that people are gathering in big cities, and they do not want to go any further. And indeed, it's a kind of challenge, but we think that we cannot force them to do so, to go to another member states. We are cooperating with other other states in order to facilitate traveling to these places, but it is for those who are doing it on voluntary basis. And indeed, the information provision is key, and there is still a room for improvement. When it comes to, and I agree with Adam that dealing with crisis is something else than discussing the structural issues. We think that there is a need to improve the asylum system and migration management system. And we support the reform, but we think it should be done in a way which guarantees the proper balance between responsibility and solidarity, and will not, let's say, not allow to misuse the system. And also we cannot use instruments which are in fact the pull factors. So we think that relocation is such an instrument. When it comes to the documentation of beneficiaries in Poland, indeed they are registered in the national database. They receive a so-called PESEL number, which allows them to use to get access to the services and so on. And they can use the special app in order to present their digital identity. We are in the contact with the Commission because it was impossible to issue them physical documents, and we are also foreseeing some challenges when it comes to the issuing, let's say, standard residence cards. And I hope we will be able to finalize.
But that's technical.
Yes, that's technical, and also in the past there was no notification of such solution in order to prove the identity and the rights. So we are in touch with Commission, and it should be solved soon. Belarusian border. So after the 24th of February, we are a bit wiser. I mean, we knew that there was a joint understanding that this is the instrumentalization, the hybrid attack, inspired by Russia as well. Now we can say that it was a kind of preparation, test of resilience of EU. And as you are probably aware, in Poland, the fence was built, and there are ongoing works on or further strengthening the protection of border. As I said previously, the Ukrainian citizens fleeing the war, and also other third country nationals from coming to Poland from the territory of the Ukraine, they all crossed the border in the border crossing points. There were no attempts to do it illegally. Most of them do not intend to stay in Poland, in the EU. Their wish is to go back to the Ukraine as soon as possible. They hope that the war will be finished, and they will be able to live again in their home country. When it comes to the people who are trying to cross the border illegally from the Belarus, they traveled from different places. Poland is not a first safe country for many of them. They do not want to stay in Poland. They want to go further to other member states, and the situation is much different. And the border with Belarus from the Belarusian side is well protected. It's not easy to get there, so it is fully supported by the Belarusian regime, and it has to be understood as a threat for security.
Okay, thank you. Who else? There are other questions.
Do you want to go first this time?
I can go first.
Okay, go ahead.
I want just to remind everybody that Article 80 of the treaty doesn't talk about two principles. It's not the principle of responsibility and the principle of solidarity. It's one single principle that includes both. They're the two sides of the same coin. So when we talk about this discussion, because to the bare bones is relocation. This is what we're talking about, solidarity. But it goes beyond relocation, solidarity. And this is in our proposals, we also go beyond relocation, solidarity. What we're trying to do with relocation is actually correcting the responsibility criterion that we have. Because if you apply this responsibility criterion, we will have a few member states that will be responsible for examining the asylum applications in 90% of the cases. So what we're trying to do is to correct this responsibility criterion, which is at the core. And is everybody will have, just to use the word of the TPD, a balance of efforts. And, but of course, the situation is different when you're in a situation of crisis than when you're in a situation of a structural migration. And here's when we have to look at the different options. But structural migration doesn't mean that we don't need the solidarity elements, because again, it's about correction. Because structural problems mean that there are a few member states that are always under pressure, just by their geographical situation and the dynamics. And yes, in the case of Poland, they can go through the BCP.
Which is?
The border crossing point. But if you are at sea, they have to be rescued at sea, because there is an international obligation to do so. So it's a completely different scenario. And this is what we have to take into account, so that our legal framework is able to cater for all the different situations. One thing I want to say is that it might have not changed the perspective of certain member states when it comes to this discussion, but it has done so in others. And I have had member states coming to me and telling me, with this Russian aggression, we just realized that maybe tomorrow is us. And we might need to have relocation or some kind of transfer or some kind of distribution. So it has changed in some, not in others. And what I think as well, and going back also, it has changed a bit the dynamic inside, that everybody thinks that, yeah, next time it could be us. And I think you can see that as well in how many member states signed up for the Solidarity Declaration. Even member states that are under a lot of pressure because of the Ukrainian crisis have still signed up for the Solidarity Declaration. So I think solidarity is there. What we have just to find is the right framework where everybody will feel comfortable. And this is where we have to find the solution. And just wanted to react very quickly to things. The TPD was also considered a pull factor. That is one of the reasons why it was never, in many cases, not. So just to say that some people consider relocation a pull factor, the TPD was also considered a pull factor. So it depends very much on the political context and also the situation we are facing. And just sorry to react to one thing you say, Eva. The fact that somebody comes into the European Union irregularly, it has no impact on the assessment of the asylum application. And we just have today, the Court of Justice reminded us of this in the court ruling on the emergency laws of Lithuania. And actually, if you remember, the Geneva Convention also says very clearly that we cannot punish somebody for entering irregularly into the territory. So yes, some people might be able to enter through the BCP and the border crossing points, and we encourage people to come irregularly. And the whole pact is precisely to try to reduce by a lot of external action, legal migration pathways to reduce to the minimum these irregular attempts to come into the European Union. But if somebody comes and they have to do it irregularly, we still have to assess their asylum application. Thank you. And the question you have for me, sorry. Actually, the TPD allows member states to do this. The Temporary Protection Directive says the member states can decide that the status of temporary protection and the status of asylum applicant are not enjoyed concurrently. This is what Article 18 says. I'm not sure I understand. So they force them to apply for asylum?
Yeah.
Okay.
They want to apply for asylum, but refer to TPD.
Maybe we can discuss it later. In any case, just to say that we are monitoring the situation. We're trying to gather information of the different practices. And as we said, this is the first time, so it's normal that people have different ways of applying this, and we're just trying to find a more harmonized way of doing it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Adam, any questions you want to take up?
Yes, thank you very much, Weed, for the floor. Maybe I will answer on both of the questions, so the one on solidarity and responsibility and on our plan in one response, or I will try. Coming from the back, yes, I think we see a certain momentum being built with the gradual, so-called gradual approach of the French presidency and the fact that they've managed to take forward the solidarity declaration on one side and the proposals on Eurodac and screening on the other side. We take this quite seriously and of course with great amount of respect, I would say. And it is clear that if we want to achieve some results before the end of the current mandate of the European Parliament and the Commission, we don't have that much time left. Well, it's a little bit longer, but still, it's we have how many? At least nine legislative proposals on the table. So, indeed, there is not that much time left. So, of course, we will focus on the key aspects of the reform as well. That means solidarity and responsibility. And here I welcome the words of Esther saying that responsibility and solidarity is one thing. It's a coin of two sides, and I completely agree with that. And we should not forget one or another. In that sense, of course, we will look as well on the solidarity issue. You know that the permanent solidarity mechanism, as proposed by the Commission, is something we have not been able to agree yet in the Council. So we will try to look at it, bringing some new perspectives, especially with the solidarity declaration now being implemented, but also through the experience we had with the TPD. I think both of these examples of current practice could help us to reshape a little bit the original proposal so that it is perhaps acceptable by more member states, if not all. For some type of crisis, we should be able to rely on an instrument as is the TPD or something of that kind. Of course, for some type of crisis, this would be very hardly to implement. But then again, we hope that the Solidarity Declaration will work well, and maybe then we can use the example of this instrument to be somehow used as well as part of the permanent solution. You know, and I counted we still have 10 hours before our presidency starts, so I can still speak rather freely. You know, the Czech Republic has not been a big proponent of relocations for many reasons. One of them is also the question of the scale. If you have a crisis of few million people, you would probably never be able to do relocation in an amount that would matter. If someone says to us, we will relocate 5,000 people from you, it's a nice gesture, but if you have another 400,000 people in the territory, the impact would be limited. On the other hand, there are some other situations where this could help indeed, especially when it comes to arrivals through the Mediterranean, for example. But as I said, we always favored a flexible solidarity solution, as is the Solidarity Declaration. That is also why the Czech Republic has joined the declaration. Even we have such a huge challenge when it's connected to the Ukrainian crisis, and we will most likely contribute at this moment financially. So I think this is something we have to work on further, because I think that's the way to go. It's a system where everybody chips in, but you have a certain room for maneuver when it comes to how you would actually do it.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we'll have these detailed discussions until later. Also because if you say something without the microphone, it doesn't get transmitted online. I don't see any other hand. I do have a question about... Oh, sorry, madam. Please go ahead.
Very short question. It's about the fact that last week Ukraine has been accepted as a candidate country to the European Union. And I wanted to know if it changes somehow the status of Ukrainian citizens at this point of history they're living. If it helps, if it upgrades their acceptation everywhere, more than what you have already done, which is enormous. This temporary text is very important, and I'm glad it has been used. If I may say something on my own behalf, a simple citizen of Europe and the world. And that's all. It's yes or no, or maybe.
Okay.
Does it change anything for Ukrainians?
There's quite a simple question. We'll take another one. Anna Nalivaiko, and then this at the back.
Thanks, Vit. I'm Anna Nalivaiko from the Wilfred Martin Center for European Studies. My question is more, I guess, to Eva and Adam. You mentioned, of course, that most of the refugees that are incoming are women and children, and of course that puts a strain onto the education system. But there is language barrier as well, because most of the children that are incoming to your country speak Ukrainian. So how do you cope with that? Is there a system in place with Ukrainian schools? Do you recruit Ukrainian teachers, or how are they integrated into the education system? Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. And now the gentleman at the back. Yeah.
Very much. I have a concrete question for the European Commission. I'm representing the coordination of the association, the Ukrainian Association in Belgium, and I'm in contact with the civil society, the government, federal one, and the absolute government. I have a very concrete question, because I see the stress of the refugees in Belgium because of the termination of the protection ending March 23, which has a huge effect on the renting and the real estate market, because a lot of landlords refused to rent apartment to the refugees because of this short termination. What are the existing plans for the extension?
Okay, some very good and deep questions. So let's maybe start, Eva, with you. There was some question about Poland specifically, but if you want to answer anything else, please do so as well.
Okay, so the question was about the integration mostly, and Adam said previously that he was a couple of weeks ago in Prague, and the Ukrainian language was in the public transport. In Poland, the situation is a little bit different, because since many years Poland was facilitating the labor migration from the Ukraine. So before the war started, there was a quite high number of Ukrainians present in Poland. So when it comes to the language barrier, of course, Ukrainian and Polish are different languages, but as well as Czech, they are from the same language group. So they are close to each other, and the grammar rules are similar. Some words are almost the same. So I think that for Ukrainian citizen, it is of course a challenge to learn Polish, but it is possible to do it, to start speaking quite fast. So this is probably one of the reasons why Poland and Czech Republic as well as are the destination countries. As for now, there is about 200,000 children in the different education facilities. Some of the Ukrainian children, I think that mostly teenagers, continued their education in Ukrainian remotely. But of course, the number of 2,100 new, let's say, pupils is a huge challenge, and it's more than one new school year. So the pressure on the education system is very high. When it comes to the support, indeed, there is a kind of a simplification of rules of employing Ukrainian teachers. When they speak Polish, they can start work in Polish education system. And since many years in Poland, there was a kind of support of the cultural assistant at school. When for the child from different country, so this is the solution. It's the scale now is different, but there was a kind of systemic solution before.
I mean, everybody agrees it's still going to be a massive challenge in all the recipient countries on how to integrate children into the education systems. So I guess there will be a lot of scope for mutual learning between the member states. We'll see. Adam, maybe you can make a point now about integration, which you also wanted to do.
Thank you, Vid. Exactly, I thought about that. Well, as Eva said, I mean, Ukrainian language and the Czech language they are not far from each other. They are both Slavic languages. So I believe that while it will be a certain challenge for the kids, it won't be such a huge issue. I can speak from my own experience, as my 5-year-old daughter born here speaks better French than me, which is not that difficult though, but they learn very quickly. In the same time, when we were dealing with this issue, the Ukrainian authorities were actually asking us if we could employ Ukrainian teachers and even use the Ukrainian curriculum. And after a lot of discussions of our experts, we've decided not to do so, because we do not want to create a separate community which will be completely detached from the Czech society. I mean, we all hope that the war will end very quickly and those people would be able to go back. But we never know. So at the end, we've decided that we would continue accepting them in our regular schooling system. They will be accepted to the regular classes with Czech teachers. We also use assistants, so we will definitely have some Ukrainian assistants to help out and to help them navigate through the whole system, especially at the beginning. But normally they will be included in the regular Czech schooling system. Yeah, I think that's about that. We will see how it goes. We also try to employ as many Ukrainian teachers as possible, but again, as in Poland, the condition is that they do speak Czech, so they can use the Czech curriculum. And maybe on your question, my very humble personal question is that at the very moment, this won't have a huge impact. And the process is actually extremely long. So this is at the moment, from my point of view, rather a political, symbolic gesture, though very important one. And I hope that the war ends way before we will get to welcome Ukraine to the EU.
Okay, thanks. Esther, please.
Actually, I was going to say the same as Adam on your question. It hasn't had any impact. Actually, we have many countries that are still, well, not many. We have a few member states that are candidate countries for years already, and it hasn't had any impact on their status here in the Union. They're still third country nationals. For example, we have Serbia is a candidate country, Montenegro is a candidate country, Turkey is a candidate country. So just to give you a few examples, so it doesn't have really an impact on the status of a person here in Europe. On the termination, there is always a misunderstanding that I have to explain, and it's that temporary protection doesn't end on 4th of March 2023. It will end on the 4th of March 2023 if the Commission does something. If we do not something, so if the Commission doesn't say we should stop temporary protection, temporary protection is automatically extended twice for 6 months period. So if between now and the 4th of March 2023, the Commission doesn't do anything, it will be automatically extended for 6 months and then automatically extended for another 6 months. That's where the Commission recommended to Member States to issue residence permits for 2 years. So that it will be a win-win, a win for the person because it will have a bit more stability, and a win for the country because it will spare the administrative burden of having to renew residence permits on the 4th of March 2023. So this is actually explained as well on the website of the European Commission, the specific website that we have for Ukrainians, which is in Ukrainian as well. But we know that member states have different practices. And this is really relies on the member state. We cannot tell the member state issue residence permit for 2 years. And to my knowledge, the Commission for the time being doesn't have any intention to stop. I cannot speak what will happen in the future. But this is the explanations we've been giving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Which I guess is a good answer, but perhaps for the landlords in Belgium,
yeah.
it doesn't really answer the question. But I'm not putting the burden on you. I understand that nobody knows what's going to happen. I'm just pointing out the very practical difficulty which is causing a lot of problems, and I don't think anybody has a solution to it. I
what I can say is that some member states are actually issuing residence permits for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And what I am aware of as well, that the state itself gives some kind of support precisely in assistance with landlords, so they get some kind of allowance, but also for the deposits that you have to give. So it gives certain reassurances to the landlord.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's also a matter of communication. I suppose at one point the European Commission will come with a bit clear communication that we don't intend to stop protection, and that would also provide a bit of reassurances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I happen to have some knowledge from Romania, and I know that there are issues there because a lot of hotels were rented to Ukrainians coming. Now the season is starting.
Yeah.
The owners want to have free capacity to use commercially. That's a big problem, and it's very difficult to navigate. And I don't think any of us have solutions for this, but it just shows how things in the end are difficult in practice, although the political will is there. But often you have these what seem like details in the first place, but then they cause a lot of issues down the line. I have one question online, and it has to do with. I don't think it has to do directly with refugees. To know the participants' thoughts on supporting the displaced Ukrainian private sector. I've been advising GIZ. So it's about the EU support for the Ukrainian private sector. I guess it means for people who have been displaced from Ukraine and are trying to have companies run a business. Anybody?
I can react on this. In Poland, the Ukrainian citizens are allowed to conduct businesses under the same rules as Polish nationals because of the situation. And we have also some programs to maybe not support, but to allow, for example, startups which are created by the foreigners to operate in Poland. So it is also open for Ukrainian citizens.
I think you directly addressed the question. Thank you.
Basically,
yes,
all Ukrainians under the TPD, anybody who is enjoining temporary protection has a right to engage in employment of self-employment. So, in principle, they can redo the business from day one. There is no basic. They don't have to ask for the work permit, for example.
Which again shows the generosity of the whole instrument. So I guess we are heading towards the end. Any final remarks? We have about 5 minutes left. We've covered a lot already.
I would just say that we are really looking forward to the Czech presidency to continue advancing on the pact and also on the Solidarity Declaration. So there are great expectations about you. And I'm sure you will, with you, Adam, and all your team, which is fantastic, I'm sure it will be good.
Thank you, Esther. Well noted.
Well, a much-needed boost for the coming half a year from representative of the European Commission. I just a final remark for myself. It's amazing how the issue of solidarity was deeply divisive for European politics over the past 7 years in relation to asylum and migration. And it's really interesting how this new crisis, unexpected situation, is putting a new light on the issue. And I haven't picked up from the three of you any problems with solidarity dealing with the current crisis. So that perhaps gives us some hope that the issue will be constructively addressed in the coming months and years, perhaps. With that, I would like to thank our panelists. It was lovely to discuss with you. Thank you, our audience. Thank you, everybody who has been following us online. And the Martin Center looks forward to seeing you in person or participating with you at our online events. Thank you very much.